Hello, my name's Tipper Presley. I live in the mountains of North Carolina in a small community called Brasstown. Although I live in the southern highlands of Appalachia, I write about all Appalachia on the blog Blind Pig and the Acorn. I've been doing that for over 10 years now. I also have a YouTube channel, Celebrating Appalachia, where I feature videos that talk about Appalachia, as you might guess. A lot of interviews from people from western North Carolina on there as well. Over the years, the foodways of Appalachia has been a big part of what I've wrote about because everyone's interested in food, and Appalachia is known worldwide for a lot of its food traditions. You know, when you think of apple stack cakes or sorghum syrup or all the gardening things, you know, from bean varieties that have been handed down through the generations, all sorts of things. It's a very rich area for the foodways. And of course, western North Carolina fits right into that. But today I'd like to talk about one very unique Appalachian dish that I grew up with, a tradition, and I've mostly just found it in Appalachia, not really spread into other areas unless their family brought it with them when they left Appalachia, but it's chocolate gravy. So a lot of people think, chocolate gravy, what do you do with it? Put it on a cake? Well, no, you put it on biscuits. It's eat like a breakfast meal. So, and it's not everyone in Appalachia doesn't eat it, by no means. You can't say something like that, or not even everyone in western North Carolina. A good example of that is I grew up eating chocolate gravy on a regular basis. My mother made it. My husband, who's from Haywood County in North Carolina, he'd never heard of it. And when we were first married, he liked to tell me, he said, chocolate gravy, that's an abomination. But, you know, after 20 years of marriage, he's come to my side of things, and he likes chocolate gravy as much as I do. But my mother, who made it for me growing up, and that's how I make it, she learned how to make it, of course, from her mother. Her mother's name was Gazzie Truett Jenkins, and she lived in the Culberson area of North Carolina. That's in Cherokee County, here where I live. And my mother said she always, her and the other kids, Granny Gazzie, raised 9 kids, so there's a lot of kids, but she said we all looked forward to it when she would make chocolate gravy because it was a special treat, you know, to get to eat that for breakfast. But she said as an adult, I could look back and see that it was a special treat for us, for sure, you know, because it was sweet and it was chocolate. But for Gazzie, her mother, it was a way of making do. She could serve chocolate gravy when there just really wasn't much else to eat for breakfast. Maybe they didn't have any sausage, or they didn't have any bacon or any ham or anything that they could, that she could cook and fry and have grease to make regular gravy with. So, you know, she said, I think my mother, Gazzie, was really smart in doing that. She had a way of making do that made us all think that she was just giving us a treat, when really there probably wasn't much else to eat, and that's why she was serving it. But as many of those old-time recipes, once you start eating them, they become part of the fabric of your lives. And even when times are better and maybe things are more plentiful, you look back to those recipes. You know, those are the ones, because that's what you grew up eating, that you have fond memories of and you want to eat on a regular basis. So there's lots of recipes for chocolate gravy. If you do a Google, you'll find all kinds of them, and most of them use milk, cocoa, sugar, butter, kind of a combination of that, maybe a little flour. But my mother's, which was Gazzie's, is really unique. It's the only recipe that I've ever seen like it, because it doesn't take any milk. It's just milk. It doesn't take any milk. It uses water. So there's another way of making do. You could save the milk for something else. So I guess maybe Gazzie's recipe was kind of like a pour do version of other chocolate gravies. Now, I've eaten those other types of chocolate gravy. They're more of like a chocolate syrup, like you would think of putting on ice cream, or you could put it on pancakes, but on ice cream or something like that. And I had a friend growing up, and her mother made that type of chocolate gravy, and every time I'd go home with her after church to eat Sunday dinner, I would hope that there was some chocolate gravy left, and they knew that I would want it, and they'd let me eat it. So it's really good too. It's just a different type of gravy than what I grew up eating. So of course, when you think about chocolate gravy, you got to have biscuits to go with it. Well, when I was first married a long time ago, my mother's a great biscuit maker, and she learned from her mother, Gazzie, who made the best biscuits ever. She kept them in the top of her wood stove, and I remember on Sundays when we go to her house for dinner, I'd go right straight to that stove and open the warmer to see if there was a biscuit in there that left from breakfast that I could eat before dinner was served, because I'd be hungry. Anyway, when I was first married, of course, I tried to make biscuits like my mother did, and she made them with flour, self-rising white lily flour, and she used lard, and she worked it into the mixture with her fingers, and then she used milk. Well, sometimes I would try it and they'd turn out okay, And then other times I'd try and they were pretty much inedible. I could just never consistently get them to turn out right. So one day I was complaining about it to her, I said, I just can't make biscuits like you do. And she said, well, maybe you should try making them like your mama. That was my grandmother on the other side, not her mother, my father's mother. She said, maybe you should try making them like she made them. And I said, well, how did she make them? And she said she only used flour, self-rising flour, white lily still, that's our favorite flour, and cream. And she said, maybe you should try that. I said, well, okay, I'll try that. So I tried that, and that my biscuits were good, and I never went back. I've been making them like that for 25 years. And I was tickled to death a few years ago when John C. Campbell Folk School printed a cookbook. They have a new cookbook, Folk School cookbook. You can check it out if you want to. But I was tickled to death when I found out my biscuit recipe was in there. So it served me well all these years. And I'm sure my Mama Marie, she had access to fresh cream. And I had, at one time in my life, I had access to it. One time in the last 20 years. And that just takes the biscuits up a level if you've got access to fresh cream. But if not, you can buy whipping cream at the grocery store, and it makes pretty good biscuits. But today I'm going to show you how to make biscuits and chocolate gravy. So the biscuit recipe that I learned from my Mama Marie via my mother, it couldn't be more easier. All it takes is the self-rising flour. I like White Lily brand, and whipping cream, any brand you want, or preferably if you have access to fresh cream, that's the best if you can get fresh cream. But it uses a ratio of 2 to 1. So if you use 2 cups of flour, use 1 cup of whipping cream. For today, I'm just going to make a small amount of biscuits, so I'm going to use 1 cup of flour, and I'm going to use a half of cup of whipping cream. So you just mix them up. It's really almost impossible to mess this up. So if you're stirring it up and you're like, wow, that's not really very moist, you can add more cream. Or if you get it too wet, you can always use more flour. So it's almost like a fail-proof recipe to use. And once it comes into forms a dough, then you can put it out on a cutting board or your counter or whatever you like to use with a little flour. And you can use a rolling pin. I don't. I just use my hands, but use whatever you prefer. You just kind of knead it. Don't really worry about overworking it. I mean, you wouldn't want to just continue to work it, but it's okay to fool with it a little bit just to get it to where you need it to be. And you can, I've done this with my husband when he uses this recipe. He makes thicker biscuits. He likes thicker biscuits. I like smaller biscuits. So really the thickness is totally up to you how you want to do that. You don't need to grease your pan or anything. You just cut them out, put them on your pan. You bake these for about 12 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes, depending on the thickness. You just have to keep an eye on them. But when they're golden brown on top and slightly browned on the bottom, in an oven that's 450 degrees. As you can tell, I'm not very picky. I always worry more about the taste than about the looks, but if you're picky about how it looks, you can for sure take more pains with it than I do. And if you, on your baking pan, if you put your biscuits really close together, they'll stay more soft and moist. If you put them further apart where there's space in between them, your biscuits will have more of a crunchier. If you like the crunchy outside, they'll get crunchier that way. Then whatever's left, I just Let's see if we can get one more, usually. Yeah. So then whatever's left, it's funny, some people call this the baby biscuit, which I guess is what I call it. But I actually, a lady recently told me that in Appalachia, her grandmother would call this the flum-molly. Flum-molly. So that's a word I've never heard, but I just put it in there. And then I usually eat this as soon as it comes out of the oven. A little treat for me. Biscuits are ready. So as I said, there's all kinds of chocolate gravy recipes. If you do a Google search, you're going to find a lot of them. But this one's really unique in that it only uses flour, sugar, cocoa, and water. No butter, no milk. So it's a unique one. So first you start off kind of medium heat, I guess. And so you put in your flour, and that's this is for a small amount of chocolate gravy. That's 3 tablespoons of self-rising flour. 3 tablespoons self-rising flour. Then I have 4 tablespoons of sugar. You could use less sugar if that's too much or too sweet for you. 3 tablespoons of cocoa. Okay. Get that mixed up together. I probably won't make as big a mess as what I'm making. And then I have 2 cups of water. Kind of gradually add it. You can also use a whisk to kind of get in there and really break up all the flour in the corners. Just like any other type of gravy, now you just let it come to almost a boil, a simmer, and then the flour will begin to thicken it. Okay, the gravy's beginning to get thick now. Once it starts to thicken, I usually cook it 2 to 3 more minutes just to make sure that it's finished and make sure that it's ready. Okay, I think it's done. Now I'll show you how we eat it. Okay, now the way you'd serve up chocolate gravy, of course you'd probably be serving yourself if you made it. You take a biscuit, and it's funny, when I was growing up, this is how I do my biscuits. I break them in little pieces, whether I'm eating chocolate gravy or sausage gravy or bacon gravy. And after I was married, I noticed my husband, he's so neat with his, he splits his biscuits in 2 and lays them out flat. So then it made me wonder, which is right? And who taught him to split his biscuits, and who taught me to tear mine up into little bitty pieces? That's just one of those things, depending on what family you're from. It's funny how we pick up those things of how we do stuff. But I put mine in little pieces, and then you just spoon your chocolate gravy over them. Hopefully you've got some good sausage or good bacon or ham or something to go with it. And that's chocolate gravy and biscuits from the mountains of North Carolina.